I think I didn't do anything wrong. I just told a story to make my friends laugh. It was my bachelorette. I was tipsy, and I bragged about one last night with my ex like it was a joke. But that night, the man I was about to marry cancelled the wedding and started building a case against me. I told myself every bride deserves a little thrill before settling down forever. That was the line I repeated in my head when Adrian, my ex, walked back into my life a few weeks before my wedding. It wasn't like I went looking for him. He appeared at the front desk of the office where I worked, all casual confidence, leaning against the counter as if no time had passed. He asked if I was still the one who laughed too loudly at his jokes, and just like that, I was pulled back in. I smiled and told him I was about to be married. He raised an eyebrow, said congratulations, then added that he hoped my fiancé knew what he was getting. The way he said it made my chest tighten with a mix of pride and guilt. Daniel, my fiancé, was the opposite of Adrian. He was steady, reliable, sometimes too careful. He planned our meals, balanced our accounts, and tucked his daughter Sophie into bed with a patience that could drive me mad. With Adrian, everything had once been fire and spontaneity. That flame had nearly burned my life down years ago, but standing there at my desk, I only remembered the heat. When I told Clara, my younger sister, about Adrian's visit, she squealed and said, maybe the universe wanted me to have a little fun before the big day. She called it one last adventure. I laughed with her, pretending it was a harmless joke. But the thought lodged itself deep in my mind. That evening at home, Daniel asked why I was smiling at nothing while stirring pasta sauce. I told him a silly story from work and brushed it off. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me like he was trying to read the truth. A few days later, Adrian sent me a text. You still owe me a goodbye drink. My heart skipped. I told myself it was just nostalgia, a chance to close old chapters properly. I replied, maybe. That night, Daniel asked if I wanted to go over the seating chart for the wedding. I sighed and said I had a long day. Maybe tomorrow. He looked disappointed but didn't press. That was what always annoyed me, his quiet acceptance. He never pushed, never fought. I wanted him to demand my attention, to show jealousy, to prove I mattered enough to lose composure over. Instead, he just kissed my cheek and said he was glad I was happy. His calmness felt like indifference to me. At work, Adrian found more excuses to stop by. He leaned over the desk, joked about how boring married life would be, and asked if I was ready to give up fun forever. I told him I wasn't giving up anything, that Daniel and I had stability. He smirked and said stability was another word for dull. I laughed too loudly, hoping others in the office didn't notice. Daniel did notice. Things, though. One evening, as I was chopping vegetables, he picked up my phone from the counter to silence a notification. His face changed as he read the screen. Adrian had sent, counting the days until that drink. Daniel asked who it was. My pulse jumped, but I forced a laugh and said Adrian was just joking around, that he had stopped by the office and teased me. Daniel's eyes stayed on mine for a long time, but he didn't argue. He simply put the phone back and said he trusted me. That word, trusted, made me bristle. I told Clara about it later, and she rolled her eyes. She said Daniel was being paranoid, and that he should be grateful I was even choosing him when men like Adrian still wanted me. I clung to her words because they made me feel powerful instead of guilty. That weekend, we had dinner with Daniel's mother, Helen. She asked how work was going, and I laughed and said busy. She looked at me sharply and asked if I'd seen Adrian again. My heart stopped for a second. I asked why she would think that. She said she had heard his name from one of Daniel's cousins who worked nearby. I put on my brightest smile and said people loved to gossip, that Daniel's family always imagined things. Helen didn't look convinced. Later in the car, Daniel asked again if Adrian was bothering me. I sighed dramatically, told him he was insecure, that he should trust me if he wanted our marriage to work. He nodded, silent again, and turned his attention to Sophie in the back seat. Sophie asked if we were fighting. I said no, of course not, and forced a laugh. But she stayed quiet the rest of the drive, staring out the window. At home, Daniel tried to go over wedding plans, but I brushed him off, saying work had drained me. He didn't argue, just folded the seating chart and put it away. His silence made me restless, so I sent Adrian a message. Maybe next week for that drink. It wasn't a promise, just an opening. That night, I lay in bed beside Daniel, who was already asleep. I looked at his calm face and thought how different he was from Adrian's restless energy. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. It was just a drink, just nostalgia, just a little spark to make me feel alive before the wedding. But deep down, I knew Daniel's quiet gaze, Helen's suspicion, and Sophie's unease meant they already sensed the truth I wasn't ready to admit. Still, I convinced myself I was in control. I believed Daniel was too quiet, too gentle, too passive to ever act. And so when Adrian's next message came, "Name the place, I'll be there," I smiled in the dark, already planning to say yes, certain I could handle everything without consequence. The following week slipped into a blur of small lies. Little tricks I told myself were harmless. I started leaving work later than usual, even on days when there was no reason. I'd linger around my desk, scrolling on my phone, pretending to type so I could say I was catching up. Daniel asked one evening why I'd been getting home after dark so often. I said my manager was swamped, and I was helping him sort through paperwork. He nodded slowly, said he appreciated how hard-working I was. That calm acceptance burned me more than suspicion would have. Why didn't he ask questions? Why didn't he push back? Part of me wanted him to explode, to accuse, to make me feel irresistible again. Instead, he quietly ladled soup into Sophie's bowl and reminded her about her homework. His steadiness felt like indifference, and I hated it. Adrian made it easy to keep drifting further. He started texting me in the afternoons, little messages that lit up my screen and my mood. "You must be bored stiff at that desk. Bet he doesn't make you laugh like I do. Don't forget you still owe me that drink." I smiled at my phone more than I smiled at Daniel those days. Clara egged me on too. When I told her Adrian had been messaging, she said it was no big deal. She said every bride had doubts, every woman deserved one last spark before giving up her freedom. She laughed that I was lucky, that most women didn't get the chance to have an ex come back to remind them of their power. She told me not to waste it. And I listened, because Clara's voice always sounded like the permission I craved. That weekend, Daniel's family hosted a dinner. Everyone was gathered, Helen with her sharp eyes, Michael quietly at her side, cousins and aunts buzzing with chatter. Daniel sat beside me, Sophie leaning against him, shy but comfortable. I should have felt proud to be at his side. Instead, I found myself scanning the room for signs of boredom, imagining what Adrian would say about all this formality. During dinner, someone asked how wedding planning was going. I laughed and said I barely had time to think about it with all the extra hours at work. Helen frowned immediately. She asked if Adrian was still around the office. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I forced a smile and said yes. He popped in sometimes, but it meant nothing. She leaned forward and said she hoped I remembered I was about to be a mercer, not a free agent. I laughed too loudly and told her not to worry, that Daniel knew I was committed. Daniel said nothing, just kept cutting Sophie's meat into smaller pieces. His silence frustrated me. After dinner, in the kitchen, Helen cornered me. She said plainly that she didn't trust Adrian, and she didn't trust me around him. I told her she was meddling, that she had never liked me, and was just waiting for me to slip up. She stared at me, lips pressed thin, and walked away. I returned to the table with a smile plastered on, but inside, I was seething. In the car home, Daniel asked softly if Adrian was bothering me. I sighed dramatically and told him I was tired of his mother always suspecting the worst. I said if he trusted me, he would tell her to back off. He just nodded again, quietly, and said, "Nothing more." That silence felt like judgment, but I twisted it in my head, telling myself it was weakness. A few days later, Adrian suggested lunch. He said we could keep it friendly, just catching up. I agreed. We met at a small cafe across town, and I laughed too loudly again, leaning in too close, enjoying the spark of being seen. As I was leaving, I felt eyes on me. I turned and saw one of Daniel's cousins across the street, watching. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to smile and wave. That night, Daniel didn't mention anything, but I saw him scrolling his phone more carefully than usual. I told myself the cousin wouldn't say anything, but the unease stuck. Clara told me to relax, that people love drama and would exaggerate even the smallest thing. She said if anyone asked, I should just say Adrian and I were discussing work. She laughed and said Daniel wouldn't believe anything bad about me anyway. I clung to that. At home, though, Sophie started asking questions. One evening, she asked why I wasn't around for bedtime stories anymore. I told her Mummy was busy making money to buy her nice things. She nodded, but her eyes didn't brighten like I hoped. Instead, she leaned closer to her father, whispering something I couldn't hear. I watched them, irritation prickling my skin. Why couldn't she understand I was doing this for myself, that I deserved something more than just being a wife and a stepmother? One night, as Daniel and I were cleaning up after dinner, he asked again if I was happy. I rolled my eyes and told him, of course. Why wouldn't I be? He studied me for a long time, then said he just wanted to make sure. I accused him of being paranoid, of listening too much to his mother's gossip. He didn't argue. He simply said, "All right," and continued washing the dishes. That calmness felt like betrayal because he wouldn't fight me, wouldn't make me feel chosen. So I messaged Adrian that night. "That drink's overdue." He replied instantly, telling me to name the place. I smiled in the dark, already imagining the thrill of it, already picturing how alive I'd feel compared to Daniel's steady silence. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, that every bride needed one last taste of freedom. But deep down, I knew the cracks were widening, and Daniel's quiet eyes were catching everyone. The night of my bachelorette party was supposed to be carefree, the final wild celebration before settling into respectability. My friends had planned everything, matching sashes, cheap crowns, and neon cocktails served in ridiculous glasses. Caroline was at my side, cheering louder than anyone, already a little drunk by the time we walked into the nightclub. The music was deafening, the lights spinning across faces, and for the first hour, I let myself believe I was untouchable. Every cheer, every toast, every photo felt like proof that I was still young, still desirable, still me. I didn't even notice how much I was drinking until my head began to spin, until my laughter was louder than everyone else's. At some point in the night, talk turned to past boyfriends. One of my friends asked what it felt like to give up freedom forever. I tossed my hair back, smirked and bragged that I wasn't really giving up anything. I said Daniel was safe and solid, but that hadn't stopped me from enjoying one last night with Adrian. The words spilled out of me half as a joke, half as a boast. The table erupted with laughter, Caroline slapping her hand on the table and shouting that I was a legend. Someone raised their phone to capture my smirk as I raised my glass. I remember leaning back in my chair, basking in the attention, feeling powerful. For once, I wasn't just Daniel's quiet fiancée. I was the star, the girl with secrets, the one they all envied. I told myself it was just words, harmless exaggeration, but I knew even as I said it that it was true. Adrian had been my little rebellion, my taste of danger before tying myself to Daniel's stability. That mix of thrill and recklessness bubbled up in my voice as I repeated the story, louder this time, about how Adrian still knew how to make me feel alive. The laughter grew, the music pounded, and I thought nothing could touch me. But in the corner of the room, one of my friends had recorded the whole thing. At first, I didn't care. We were all drunk. We were all talking nonsense. Who would take it seriously? But the next morning, when I woke up with a pounding head, Caroline showed me the video on her phone. I watched my own face on screen, flushed with alcohol, bragging about my ex while wearing a tiara that said bride-to-be. My stomach lurched, but I forced a laugh and told her it was fine. She agreed, saying men were too sensitive, that Daniel would never find out anyway. I believed her, or at least I pretended to. That evening, though, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was the video. No text, no explanation, just the clip of me bragging. My blood ran cold. I knew instantly what it meant. Someone had shared it. And then I realized Daniel had probably seen it already. I rushed home, heart hammering, rehearsing excuses in my head. When I walked through the door, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table. He didn't yell, didn't throw the phone at me. He just looked at me, calm but unreadable, and asked if it was true. I told him it was a joke, that I was drunk, that everyone exaggerated at bachelorettes. He said nothing. His silence stretched like a wall I couldn't climb. I grew defensive, snapping that he was taking a silly moment too seriously, that his mother had probably poisoned his mind already. He didn't argue, didn't accuse. He just said, "All right," and went upstairs. That "all right" cut deeper than any scream could have. I called Caroline in a panic, telling her Daniel had seen the video. She told me to stick to the story, to insist. It was all an exaggeration. She said if I admitted anything, I'd be giving him power. Her advice steadied me, but only for a moment. Later that night, I overheard Sophie asking Daniel if he was still going to marry me. His quiet answer, too low for me to catch, sent a chill down my spine. The next day, whispers spread. Daniel's relatives began messaging him, asking if the rumors were true. Helen called him directly. I heard his side of the conversation, short, clipped answers, nothing revealing. When he hung up, I asked what she had said. He told me she didn't need proof to know what I was. I snapped that she had hated me from the start, that she wanted this wedding to fail. He didn't reply. Instead, he gathered Sophie's school things and left for the evening without saying where. I told myself he was sulking, that he'd come around, that all men forgave if you smoothed it over long enough. But that night, alone in our bed, I kept seeing the image of my own face on that video, smug and careless, the kind of proof no excuse could erase. The fallout came faster than I ever imagined. Within 2 days of the Bachelorette, the video had spread beyond my circle of friends. A cousin of Daniel's sent it to him directly, and soon enough, half the family had either watched it or heard whispers. By the time we all gathered at Helen's house for Sunday dinner, the air was already heavy with suspicion. I walked in holding Daniel's arm, forcing a smile, acting as though nothing was wrong. Sophie barely glanced at me, clinging instead to her grandmother. That stung, but I brushed it off, convincing myself she was just being shy. At the table, conversation was stiff. I tried to fill the silence, laughing about work, praising the meal, but no one laughed with me. Finally, Helen set her fork down and asked me directly if what she had seen was true. My blood went cold. I pretended not to understand at first, but she pressed again, asking if I had really said I spent one last night with Adrian. I forced a laugh, waving my hand as though it were all ridiculous, and told her it was just a drunken joke that everyone exaggerates at bachelorettes. She stared at me, unblinking. Daniel sat still, his hands folded, eyes down on his plate. That silence made me furious. Why wouldn't he defend me? Why wouldn't he tell them I was joking, that he believed me? Instead, it was Caroline who jumped in, loudly telling everyone to stop being dramatic. She said I was allowed to have fun, that women needed to blow off steam before weddings, that no one should be policing my words. I nodded quickly, grateful for her support, but the table stayed quiet. Michael, my father, finally spoke. He asked if it was true. Just that, calm and quiet. His tone made me falter. I insisted again that it was a joke, that people were twisting my words. But the more I spoke, the weaker my excuses sounded. Sophie suddenly pushed her plate away and asked Daniel if he still wanted to marry me. The whole table went silent. I felt every eye on me, but Daniel didn't look up. He reached for Sophie's hand and said softly that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes. I snapped then, accusing Helen of planting ideas in the child's head, saying she had always wanted me out of the picture. Helen fired back, telling me I had embarrassed her son enough, that the video was proof of who I really was. My voice rose, telling her she had no right to judge me, that Daniel and I were fine. But when I turned to him, he still didn't meet my eyes. That silence was unbearable. After dinner, when people began drifting into the living room, I pulled Daniel aside. I told him he was making me look like a villain, that his silence was worse than shouting. He said quietly that I didn't need his words. The video already spoke for itself. My chest tightened with panic. I told him if he loved me, he wouldn't let one stupid moment ruin everything. He said nothing, just walked away to sit with Sophie on the couch. I stood there, seething, certain everyone was whispering about me. Caroline tried to reassure me, saying Daniel was just sulking, that men always forgave if you waited them out. But her voice didn't sound convincing anymore. That night, when we got home, the silence between us felt like a wall. I tried to climb into bed beside him, but he turned away. I asked if he was still going to marry me. He didn't answer. I accused him of being cruel, of letting gossip decide our future. Still nothing. I fell asleep restless, telling myself he would calm down in the morning. But at dawn, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing. Dozens of messages flooded in. Friends, family, even co-workers, asking if the wedding was really off. Confused, I scrolled through until I found the source. Daniel had sent a single text to every guest on our list: "The wedding is cancelled." My heart dropped. I ran downstairs and found him sitting at the kitchen table, Sophie's backpack already packed beside him. He looked up only briefly, then told me calmly that he couldn't go through with a marriage built on humiliation. I tried to laugh it off, telling him he was overreacting, that he was making a scene over a silly video. He shook his head and said it wasn't just the video, it was everything. The lies, the silence, the way I cheered when others mocked him. I shouted that he was being unfair, that I was the one being judged, that everyone was piling on because of his mother. He didn't argue. He just stood, picked up Sophie's bag, and said they'd be staying with his mother for a while. I screamed after him that he was a coward, that he was destroying everything we'd built. He paused at the door, turned, and said quietly, "No, you did." And then he was gone. I stood there shaking, surrounded by silence, with only the echo of those words filling the empty house. The days after Daniel cancelled the wedding were a blur of shock, anger, and frantic excuses. I told myself he was bluffing, that no man would throw away a relationship just because of one video. But the more I tried to reach him, the more I realized he wasn't bluffing at all. He was gone in every way that mattered. He moved into Helen's house with Sophie, and suddenly, all the wedding plans that had filled our calendar vanished overnight. The florist cancelled, the venue released our date, even the dressmaker called asking if I still wanted my fitting. Each call felt like another piece of my life crumbling. Caroline told me not to panic, that Daniel was just sulking, that he'd come around once the dust settled. She said men always came back when they realized how lonely they were. I clung to her words even as my phone buzzed with silence from Daniel's side. He wouldn't answer calls, wouldn't reply to texts, wouldn't even acknowledge the long messages where I promised him it had all been a joke. Then one evening, a man in a suit knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Daniel's lawyer and handed me a thick envelope. My stomach dropped as I tore it open. Inside were legal documents, notices of cancelled joint accounts, a petition to recover deposits from the wedding fund, and a motion concerning custody arrangements for Sophie. My hands shook as I flipped through page after page of cold legal language. He wasn't bluffing. He was protecting himself, and worse, he was making sure I had no power left. I called Caroline in tears, screaming that he had turned on me. She told me to call a lawyer of my own, to fight back, to accuse him of being controlling. She said I could spin it as him punishing me over a harmless party joke. I wanted to believe her, but the documents in front of me weren't jokes. They were precise, prepared, undeniable. That night I drove to Helen's house, desperate to confront him. Helen met me at the door, arms crossed, face stern. She told me Daniel didn't want to see me. I demanded to talk to Sophie at least. Helen said Sophie was asleep, and even if she wasn't, she didn't need to be dragged into my mess. I shouted that Sophie was practically mine too, that I had been in her life for years. Helen's expression hardened as she told me I had thrown that chance away the moment I bragged about Adrian. Her voice was calm but sharp, and it cut straight through me. I turned and left, my anger boiling. Back at home, I tried to tell myself I still had control. I posted pictures online of me smiling with friends, pretending everything was normal, hoping Daniel would see and regret losing me. But deep down, I knew he wasn't even looking anymore. A few days later, I met with my own lawyer. She read through the papers, her face tightening with each page. She told me Daniel had already secured affidavits from family members who had seen the video and heard my words. He had also attached witness statements about my lunches with Adrian and the cousin who saw us leaving the cafe together. I tried to laugh it off, saying it was all circumstantial, that no one could prove anything. My lawyer looked at me flatly and said judges didn't take kindly to brides bragging about cheating the week before a wedding. She explained that while Daniel couldn't stop me from living my life, he had every right to protect his daughter and his finances. She warned me that his case was strong, much stronger than mine, because he had stayed calm, collected evidence, and moved swiftly. The more she explained, the more my chest tightened. I left her office feeling cornered. Caroline told me to ignore the lawyer, to stay confident, to act like Daniel was just a man scorned. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him at the table that night, calm and silent, watching me unravel while he built his wall of proof. I tried one last time to reach him. I left a voicemail telling him I loved him, that Adrian had meant nothing, that the video was just drunk talk. I begged him not to throw us away. He never called back. Instead, another envelope arrived a few days later. This one contained finalized filings. Daniel was officially withdrawing from all financial obligations tied to me, securing his accounts, and moving forward with a request for sole custody of Sophie. The final page had a list of exhibits, screenshots, receipts, witness statements, and the video itself. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold the papers. I realized then that while I had been clinging to Caroline's empty reassurances, Daniel had been carving me out of his life with quiet precision. No screaming, no dramatic confrontations, just cold, lawful steps that left me exposed and powerless. That night, I sat alone in the living room with the stack of documents spread around me, realizing for the first time that I wasn't the one holding the cards. Daniel was. He always had been, and I had been too blind to see it. The court date came faster than I expected, and walking into that building felt like stepping into a nightmare of my own making. I wore a tailored dress, trying to look composed and respectable, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling. Daniel was already there with his lawyer, calm as ever, his suit neat, his face unreadable. He didn't look at me, not once. Sophie sat beside Helen in the back row, holding her grandmother's hand, her little face turned toward her father with quiet trust. That sight alone nearly broke me, but I forced myself to keep my chin high. When the hearing began, Daniel's lawyer spoke first. He presented the folder I had seen pieces of before, but now it was all laid out formally, devastatingly. There was the video of me at my Bachelorette, laughing drunkenly and bragging about one last night with Adrian. The clip was short but damning, my smirk and the cheers of my friends filling the silent courtroom. Then came the witness statements, cousins, co-workers, even a neighbor who said they had seen Adrian visiting me, each piece stacked neatly, onto the next until the weight of it crushed every excuse I had prepared. My lawyer tried to push back, insisting the video was taken out of context, that drunk words shouldn't destroy a marriage. She said it was bragging, not proof. But even she sounded unconvinced as the judge frowned down at the papers. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, never raised. He said he wasn't there for revenge. He said he had accepted long ago that he couldn't control my choices. He said his only concern was Sophie, that she deserved a home where honesty and respect mattered. He described how she had cried after hearing whispers from relatives, how she had asked him if he still wanted to marry me. His voice didn't shake, but mine did when it was my turn. I said I loved him, that Adrian meant nothing, that the whole thing was a mistake. I tried to blame the alcohol, to blame the crowd, even to blame Helen for fueling the gossip. But as I spoke, I saw the judge's expression harden, and I knew my words sounded hollow. My father sat with his hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Caroline glared at everyone, whispering furiously that they were being unfair, but no one listened. Helen sat tall, her hand firmly around Sophie's, her face set with the kind of certainty I could never match. The judge spoke after a long pause. He said the evidence showed a pattern of deception and humiliation, not just one drunken mistake. He said Daniel had acted responsibly and calmly, securing his finances and building a stable case. He said the court's duty was to protect the child, and then he awarded temporary full custody of Sophie to Daniel, with me allowed only supervised visitation. My stomach dropped, the words echoing in my ears. My lawyer squeezed my arm and whispered that we could fight this, that it wasn't final, but her tone betrayed the truth. We had lost. Daniel didn't look at me, not once. He stood, thanked the judge, and quietly began packing his documents. Sophie rushed to his side the moment he turned, clutching his hand like she never wanted to let go. I sat frozen, the world tilting around me, watching as the people I thought I controlled slipped through my fingers. Afterward, I tried to catch him in the hallway. I begged him to talk, to let me explain, to remember all the good times. He stopped, looked at me with tired eyes, and said only, "It was never about one night. It was about everything you turned it into." Then he walked past, Sophie's small hand tucked safely in his, Helen at his side. I drove home in silence, my chest hollow. When I opened the door to our house, the emptiness hit me like a blow. Daniel's clothes were gone, his bookshelves empty, even Sophie's toys cleared from her room. The fridge was bare except for condiments, the photos from the walls removed. On the kitchen counter sat a single envelope. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was the finalized custody schedule, neatly typed, every date and hour laid out with precision. Tucked behind it was a simple note in Daniel's handwriting. "Please respect this, for her sake." My knees gave out, and I slid into a chair, staring at the paper as tears blurred my vision. The house was silent, stripped of laughter, stripped of love. All that remained was the echo of my own arrogance, the memory of a night when I thought bragging made me powerful. I had cheered and laughed, certain Daniel would always stay no matter what. But he had left without anger, without cruelty, with nothing but quiet, lawful steps that erased me from his life. And now, staring at the empty rooms, I finally understood what his silence had meant all along. It was the sound of him letting me go forever. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.